I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I've had a few people ask me, what's your backstory? Who are you exactly? Some people in a nice way, like, hey, you're interesting. Let me hear more about you. Others like, who the hell are you? Why should I care about what you think? Um, I'm going to do a little bit of that, but I think I'll frame it more as my story as almost a cautionary tale, or as maybe somebody can glean a little bit of wisdom and avoid some of the things that I've done. And I'm going to especially direct it towards young men. I think today they're kind of tossed back and forth by all these cultural forces, and it makes them feel like they don't have an identity, they don't have stability, they don't know what to believe, they don't know what to do. And I've been there, and as you'll see, I think it was always honest, mostly honest, probably in that, okay, I don't believe in this so anymore, so I'm going to try what's over here. So it was a journey where I was really trying to find a place, and so some of it, was an honest journey, but it really I was being, as the pendulum in our culture really swings back and forth between, a lot of young people go far left and then they go far right. I think that kind of those kind of cultural winds were pulling me different directions, largely because I didn't have any real understanding of truth or a place that I felt I could stand. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Especially, I want to direct it towards, I've been a little harsh on the people who are really going hard to the right, far right. People like the Groypers, and they're going with the Nick Fuentes or rad trad Catholics. And part of the reason I'm a little harsh on them is I went down. I wasn't Groyper, but I was more like rad trad Catholic, and I was extremely conservative. I'd say I'm still conservative. I'm just not like anything far right. Um, but I want to direct it towards them because um, I feel like there are some points there that make sense because I grew up in a big city. Just to start the story, and I saw a lot of probably what they saw that they're frustrated with. The school district. I went to public school through middle and high school, and the names of the schools were Thomas Jefferson Elementary. There was George Mason. It was named after the founding fathers, and then the schools my sisters had gone to in the next town over um, was Jeb Stuart, which was a Confederate general. And this is the D.C. area. We're inside the Beltway, which is the most busy part of the D.C. area. And all those school names got changed after we were there, but it was the same kind of sense of, these people are not acceptable. The kind of founders are these white evil guys that you shouldn't be like, and every villain in the stories that we learn, yeah, white Christian, male, sexist, racist, whatever. And for people in my social circle, we were sort of the skateboarder kids that were rebellious and all of that. We all just roll our eyes and like what they're saying basically whatever everybody else is fine, but you guys are unacceptable. So that was, or it was a song by Minor Threat, which is Minor Threat is a punk band that we listened to back then called "Guilty of Being White," where it's like you blame me for slavery 100 years before I was born, guilty of being white. But the whole song's like, you know, I think kind of the sentiment uh, of white kids in big cities that are just frustrated, and so I do feel like I have a little bit of insight into that. There was not anything like the Groypers that I was aware of. Although I mean, there were skinheads in the punk rock circles that we hung out with, but not the racist kind. There's different kinds. The actually main kind of skinhead was just traditionals, and they were not Nazis. The ones that then there were actually skinheads against racial prejudice, sharps. There's a few of them around, and then there was also boneheads, is the name for them, I guess. I think that's what they call themselves. I'm not sure that was just like some insult to other people, but they're the ones that had the red shoelaces, and they were the racist skinheads, but they didn't really hang out with the other, skater people or punks or so. Just to say, there was that element, but I don't, in the DC area, I don't think there. I saw a lot of that. That wasn't, at least in circles I ran in. Basically, to start with, I was in a nice evangelical family. Is how I was raised. I was in this, my dad was a Christian school teacher, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom of four kids, and they were the nicest, most loving people. They raised us in Rivendell. Literally, that was the name of the school. It was like the Shire in Lord of the Rings. But my dad had this tiny private school called Rivendell that he was the headmaster of, head teacher, because it was so small. There's only like a few kids a grade, so they didn't even have a principal. He was just the head teacher in Arlington, Virginia, and that's DC area, but the the people that we were associated with when I was really young were just very loving and caring, and my parents included. My vision of the world was, oh, we sit around the fire and we read Lord of the Rings, and we go play in the woods, and everybody loves each other. And if you do something kind of bad, your parents like, why would you do that? Just love your brother. And it was an idyllic little. I don't remember really my parents even yelling at us. Somehow they just kept us in order with love. And um, so I remember at about fourth grade, fifth grade. It's back in the late '80s, early '90s, where they let you just wander, and they just like come back when the street lights come on, kind of thing. People talk about. Um, and riding your bike around the DC area and the Beltway, you come across a lot of different kinds. It's not all the idyllic, Shire Hobbit. It's there was a lot of kids that were young kids and swearing at you. And I remember this one kid, like I was in fourth grade maybe, and he called me, uh, B word, N word, like what you doing, B word, whatever. And I was like, well, that doesn't even make sense because I'm not a woman and I'm not a black person. So, and everybody just looked at me like, what? I mean, these are all little kids, like fourth grade, but we're like, you know, I was like an alien to them because I had never heard that term used in that way, and I'm like twice their size. I'm 6'6" now. And so these are all kids that are like half my size, but my same age, and they're throwing around insults and all that. And they just look at me like, this guy's like a freak. So I had this sense that I was just really weird. And I'm like, I'm weird? Why am I weird? I felt normal. Like, I was always normal in my circles that, my family ran in. I was always the fastest kid. I was the best athlete. I was, I did really well in my grades. When we took our assessment tests and all of that, there'd be these national ones. I actually got to go to a ceremony for doing so well on these tests, which I did awful in school, once I stopped caring. But at that point, when I cared, yeah, everybody. And so all that was my rules for social acceptability, was just like doing well in school, doing really well in sports, doing what your parents said. And all of a sudden, everybody's like, oh, that is weird. It's like I entered another realm. So I look around and everybody's like, oh yeah, my parents are divorced, and we steal my mom's pot, and she has her pot's not as good as this kid's mom's pot over there. Everybody's taking their mom's pot, and I'm like, okay, it's by fifth grade, I was just like, I feel like my parents, I don't want to say they lied to me because they didn't. They showed me a world, but I had this sense that the world they showed me was outside of, it was Mordor outside of the the Shire. It was not more Shire. So I was like very young. I lost my faith in fifth grade and fell in with the DC skateboarder culture and just wider nihilism, basically, of that '90s era. So, I started to smoke cigarettes in like fifth grade, and my parents are very hands off, so they were amazing parents when I was a little kid, but they weren't really that controlling. So I was gone the entire day, and then came back smelling like cigarettes or alcohol. They'd just be like, ugh, you shouldn't do that. But it wasn't really like I had extreme boundaries, so I just kept going and going, and I ended up basically getting kicked out of my high school. I ended up, I was a daily pot smoker for years before that, and I was drinking as much as I could possibly drink, and thankfully did not get into like the harder drugs much that the people around me started getting into. There wasn't fentanyl back then, but there was a lot of people were just doing pills back then, like Adderall and OxyContin and Percocet and Ritalin and all these pills that was everywhere. And sadly, a lot of people got addicted to, especially the opioid ones, opiate pills, and we lost some people in terms of they got heavily addicted and eventually either started shooting heroin or they would OD and die a couple or suicide. So that was later after we'd graduated high school that started happening, but the addiction started early. So I'm grateful that I didn't follow all my friends. It was funny; they almost discouraged me because it would have been competition. They're like, "Don't do it, man, because there's not enough to go around already. And then if you become somebody who likes this, then that was the mentality that was there wasn't enough to go around. It's hard to get these things, and you just add another person in the mix." So that was funny. But I ended up kind of collapsing in my life, anyways. I mean, I think marijuana was getting so strong it almost drove me insane. Like I started having crazy panic attacks. Um, I thought I was this punk rock revolutionary that was going to, like, in my mind, I was, if Antifa had existed, I would have joined Antifa. I was very left wing, and I thought, this whole system, government, of capitalism and big government. I wanted us to maybe everybody go live in communes and that kind of thing. So I don't know. I was that mindset. Eventually, I just got in so much trouble with the law and school. And like I got kicked out of high school. I got sent to juvenile detention. The courts sent me off to a boot camp to graduate high school. And so I was one. But it's funny because I had such a nice little family, but I think I had so dismissed everything they taught me. I was like, they're just these like golden retrievers back at home, and it's a world of pit bulls, and they're just naive. They just don't know what they're talking about. Like, so I just ignored it all, and basically was a feral child running around the DC area. Um, but it was miserable. I made myself miserable. I made everybody else miserable. Um, yeah. So, but all that brings me to that boot camp that I was sent to. I was remembering something that was told to me. So there's a kid at this camp that was really annoying to me. He was a pathological liar where he would just make up a new story every day that was just obvious BS. We'd ask him questions and he wouldn't be able to, figure out the answers because he trapped himself in lies. And I'd get all mad, and the counselors thought I was going to like attack this kid and beat him up. But then one of the counselors was like, "Hey, why are you letting him control you and control your emotions?" And I was like, "What? Nobody controls me. I'm uncontrollable. I've tried to make my whole shtick be about that I do whatever I want. Nobody tells me what to do." And he's like, "No, he's controlling you pretty clearly. Every time he says something, uh, he will direct your emotions, and you're just all over the place." And I was like, usually I had a really good, comeback to everything. I'm a pretty good debater, and I like to discuss ideas and always have like a comeback to something. But I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I just had to laugh because like I guess so. I guess I don't know. I guess he is. But it stuck with me. Like it's almost a stoic, stoicism point of not letting the world toss you back and forth. Be steady in your emotions. But it's also a point that I want to make with this video is, you have to find a place where everything is stable and solid, where you feel like you understand the world and you have a place of balance. You're not being thrown this way or that way. And I especially want to keep coming back to this verse here during the video because I think it's it defines what I'm trying to say. It's Ephesians 4 where it says, if you don't want to be a child anymore, like children tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine, you know, speak truth in love so you can grow up in every way into him who's the head, Christ. So basically, if you don't want to be a child, if you want to grow up and be like Christ and don't be tossed to and fro, but speak truth in love. There's another part where it talks about truth in love as well. Um, so that's the place you want to reach where you're solid and you understand the truth, but it's not a truth that is has no love in it. Like I think on the right, sometimes there's that where it's harsh truth just crammed down. We're gonna enforce order in a harsh way, or love with no truth, which is kind of what the if you go too far left, that's what you get there. You just get accept everything, accept everyone. We love everybody. So after that boot camp situation, I had a high school diploma, and I moved back, to DC, and I'm like, what do I do? So I start being I'm a construction worker at that point. I do carpentry. I enjoy it, but I also drink every single day. Um, and I was not in a good place, and I started having real bad panic attacks where I didn't have an identity. I felt like that punk rock revolutionary that I had been in my mind was crushed, and now I'm like this. Just what even am I? I just go to work all day every day moving things around a construction site. I come home and drink. I felt like a 50-year-old, you know redneck or something. I don't know, but so I start having what I felt like were heart attacks, but I learned later they're panic attacks, um, and just really bad uh, sense that I'm going to die of a heart attack. So I go to a doctor, a heart doctor, and they do all these tests, and they're like, "No, your heart looks to be fine, but do you smoke, drink, use marijuana, drink a lot of coffee, get bad sleep, have a lot of stress?" And I was like, "Check, check, check, check. Yeah, all that." He's like, "Well, it might be is just like, acid reflux, heartburn, or stress. Just really all that's going to cause tightness in your chest." Um, and then you can interpret that as a heart attack. And I'm like, no, I left there just like they missed it. They didn't find my heart impending heart attack. And so I went home and I laid in bed, and I that night I was laying there, like the chest pain got worse and worse while I was laying there. Which I've found since, if you have heartburn, if you have acid reflux kind of thing, put your bed up at like 1 or 2 inches on the headboard up, just kind of like elevate it, and when you're laying down, all that acid won't just flow up your esophagus. Just something I found that has solved it for me. Back to the story. Um, so I was laying there thinking I was dying. The chest was real bad, and I was having a panic attack, just real bad. And I don't know if you've ever been in a position where you really thought you were going to die. Your thinking changes a lot. You just start, yeah, everything is different. You just start thinking about your family. You start thinking about all kinds of things. And I was like, well, this is it. And so I threw up maybe my first prayer since I was in fifth grade when I believed in God back then. And I was like, well, if there is a God, I'm sorry, and I've lived a pretty shitty life, pretty much just a harm and a terror to everybody around me and my family and my friends and anybody around. So I'm sorry about that. And I thought at that point, I was like, okay, no, I just die. Um, and it wasn't really even to God. It was like, if there is a God, this, because I wasn't really in a position where I thought there was necessarily. But I felt this wave of I didn't die, spoiler alert, I'm still here. But I felt this wave of hope is the way I've described it. It sounds corny, but I just felt like this sense of like, you know what? Life actually, not only are you probably going to live here, but life is going to be okay. It's going to be good. And I hadn't felt that like as a sense of like, this could be a good world. Um, So that intrigued me because I just had stress, anger, hatred, just my emotions day to day where there's never like this sense of hope. So I was like, whoa, I'm going to chase that because I'm at a rock bottom here. So I started looking at, different world religions. I tried to, I ended up, you know, people who are, not religious will be like, oh, you probably went back to, your Protestant upbringing because that's how you were raised. And so that's why you ended up back there. You might be right. I don't know. But that's what made the most sense to me after I looked. I was like, well, Islam seems very brutal, and Buddhism doesn't even really believe in a God. It's sort of just making some guesses about how to unite to the universe or something. And Hinduism seems complicated and weird. And like I looked at all these religions, those are kind of assuming that one of the religions out there is the right one, that God is showing himself in some way in Revelation. But I just was like, okay, well, Christianity. I mean, that there's like eyewitnesses that wrote books about his resurrection, and there are people there. I mean, there's like a real historical figure, and then it's the biggest one. I'm going with that. So I kind of went all in on that. Like I was saying, going back and forth, I went as Christian as you could be, I guess. I was it was very important to me, but I had to learn a lot. Like I had blocked out everything that maybe I'd learned in Sunday school. So, um, I went with my uncle who had been kind of a biker guy and kind of a tough character. He then became a missionary, and he had something in Dominican Republic. He would go build houses there. So I was like, okay, I can do that. And there's the people, the church that went there for the project. He would bring different churches, and the one when I was there was a Presbyterian church, and they were trying to teach me a little bit. And I was like, really, they're like, have you explain your being saved experience? Because I don't know, like they didn't really think um, I was fully saved for a while, just because like during worship, everybody else would be like really emotional, and I'd be sitting there like maybe I'd mouth the words, but they're like, you don't seem to be worshiping. I'm like, I don't know, man. I just got here. But then they start to describe what they believe theologically, and that's where I was like, whoa, you know, whatever I believe, it's not that. So they got me this book, John Piper's book about something, but in it, I was reading about how God even controls the devils and what they do, and everything that happens in the world is controlled and determined, preordained as part of a plan. Like he didn't have to say this little girl was raped for 5 years. He planned that. It wasn't that he saw in the future that somebody would freely choose to do it and said, this is the world as it is. And so I say, I'll try to redeem it as I go along. And no, he planned that thing to happen. Whole train car full of kids. Yeah, we're going to toss all them into the oven at this point in the plan, in the story that I'm writing. Um, and I was like, that can't be. Like, so I thankfully my uncle talked to me about it and was like, yeah, you don't have to be Calvinist. There's other things you can be. But regardless, I was sophomore in college at this point, and I had been at a state school, Western Carolina, that I don't know why I went there. I think just because my cousin had also had some trouble and he was able to get in there. So I was like, maybe I could go to college and stop being a construction worker. And so I had gone to 1 year there and I was a mess. Like I was just like, I don't belong in college. I could barely talk to people. I was, like I said, I almost had like a nervous breakdown and all these people were starting to drink and smoke pot. And it's like, I was just like, I'd been doing that for like a decade at that point. And I'm like, you guys just, it was different for me. So I'm just leaving. I'm going back home. But then, yeah, become a Christian after that, and you know, see that Calvinism is not cool at the mission trip, and so then I actually end up going to a Calvinist college, just because whatever, I didn't really think of it as I'm going there because of the Calvinism. But so while I'm there, I go really really hard, Protestant. I don't even say fundamentalist, but close. I was a little confused by some of the early Genesis stuff and how to make that work, but pretty much like a Baptist, or I went to a non-denominational church in Michigan, but I was uh, I was on that side of things. And then after I graduated, I started to look into Catholicism, and hey, I'll go get a master's in theology. I can't find anything to do with my political science degree, so I'll go get a master's in theology at this Catholic school. And I was more and more interested in Catholicism. I was like, I was looking for that pure truth. But I was looking for where to stand really to get started on my life. Then I could kind of move further. So I ended up going to do a master's in theology. And while I'm there, now I'm like 26, I convert to Catholicism. And it was a Jesuit school that was very progressive. And I think that pushed me to reject progressive Christianity. I'm like, the catechism says this, you're saying the opposite. Or something very obvious. Like, they'd say, like, Moses didn't go up on the mountain and get the Ten Commandments. He lied about that. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? So I would go and try to do my own reading on the same topics and push back. And I think that directed me towards a very traditionalist trajectory where I was like, okay, I mean, I thought Catholic was Catholic, but apparently there's these different camps now that I'm Catholic that I have to understand, and I'm not that one because I know I'm coming from like a fundamentalist Protestant perspective background, so I'm not them. So, if they're thinking gay marriage and abortion and all these things are fine, and I try to, um, especially afterwards, towards the traditionalist direction, and a couple times, just to speed up the story, I went in and out of the church even for that first 5, 6 years. I would go to Catholic churches after I got out of that master's program, but then I'd be like, well, I'm going to go to a non-denominational church for a little while again, um, and then I think what really brought me back in, uh, it seemed like I was better morally whenever I'd go to Catholic churches, and when I go to evangelicals, just like, yeah, I almost felt like I could do whatever I want. Like, you're saved, okay? So I was like, oh, cool. I guess I'm just good. No, but we want to disciple you, make sure you're growing in Christ and all of that. But it's not like there's any real consequences if I messed up on something here and there. But then, a few years in, I start to get very, very serious about my Catholicism. I came across the TNT show, that Taylor Marshall and Tim Gordon show. I got their books. I did. Oh, Taylor Marshall said start going to Latin Mass like every time you can. I think he said like go 4 times in a row if you can, or something like that, and do the Rosary every day. I started really like doing that. I started writing for Crisis Magazine. I was just very in that scene. What was interesting is it almost led me to a place of more despair than when I was an atheist, nihilist delinquent in some ways, because I really latched on to these ideas of if you do anything the smallest wrong, you got to get to a confession immediately, because there's kind of this line. I mean, it's hard to draw between. It's like, well, did I have full knowledge there? Did I have complete consent and deliberate consent of my will? How grave was that? And the line is not so clear. So it's a little bit like, if you look at a girl for 3 seconds, oh well, that's just a look, and you look away. If you look at five, for five, dude, that was a little bit more deliberate. Was that deliberate enough? Um, that kind of thing. Or like some priest would be like, oh, you had 3 beers, that's fine. If you have four, that's a mortal sin. I was told that. And then another priest is like, oh, yeah, you could have six. You had 6 beers? That's fine. I do that all the time. That's not a sin. And I'm like, oh, you know? And I was always living with this very tight scrupulosity of like, am I going to hell? My life became very paranoid. And especially for other people. Like, I got to a place where like I wouldn't dream of doing anything that would threaten me going to hell, which is good. But, I was very worried about everybody else because like how many people are going to heaven? Like nobody. Like if you think about all the people that are in the church, like I mean, a lot of the traditionalists would they believe that massa damnata, the sort of idea of Saint Augustine that almost everybody's going to hell. Like if you're Protestant, like maybe occasionally a Protestant is like accidentally goes to heaven by whatever. But mostly you got to be Catholic. Mostly you got to be like, did you go to church every week? Did you confess after every time you committed a mortal sin? Uh, I saw one traditionalist priest in my diocese post something like, I've never seen somebody go more than 7 days without. This is not a normal priest. He's more traditionalist. He talked about people don't go more than 7 days without committing a mortal sin. So you really should come every week. I'm just thinking like, dang, this is ridiculous. Like just the level of it's almost impossible just to like live normally. What pushed me over the edge at one point was this James Joyce book. There was this quote from when the James Joyce character is supposed to kind of be like him. Portrait of the artist as a young man, and the main character is supposed to be like him when he was a kid, and he went to this camp for young boys where a priest is just telling him about hell, and he goes into like a couple pages long about what hell is like, and man, it was like an eternity is the worst part of it because he was talking about how imagine this bird comes to a giant pile of sand. This pile of sand goes all the way, miles high, and every 1,000 years, every 10,000 years, takes one piece of sand off and puts it somewhere else. Every 10,000 years. Now imagine that bird, however many eons and eons it takes to clear that whole pile of sand and move it. He said eternity would not have even begun at that point, and it's each point in that eternity is so painful. You're in fire that's more brutal than any fire we have in this earth. And I was like, do I really believe that about all, like almost everybody that I know is going to that forever and ever? And I just couldn't believe it. It sort of broke my mind a little bit. And I got a lot of comfort from Bishop Barron and from Vatican II. I was like, pretty much every problem I had with traditionalist uh, Catholicism, I was like, wow, that's why Vatican II did that. Oh, the whole thing where like they used to have monarchs that would kidnap people and torture them to see if they really believed, or they burn heretics at the stake, or go on crusades where they kill other Christians or innocent people. Sometimes crusades were justified, trying to regain land, but just looking at that, and now it's like, oh no, we have religious freedom. There's conscience. Give people a little space. You don't have to torture them to see if they believe the right thing. You can give them a little space, and just all the different areas, a little more hopefulness on the last things. So I was like, oh, well, all this makes a lot of sense actually, and that's kind of where I've ended up in this swinging back and forth. The last few years, I've been in the just moderate normie Bishop Barron lane. And I'll tell you, it's a hopeful place. It's a good balance, truth and love that I was talking about. Um, and I recommend it, So when I was saying don't get pushed to the left or the right, there's imagery in the Bible about that. And it was kind of seen as the right hand as a place of order and, rules and justice. And then the left hand was a place of mercy and love, but also kind of chaos and lack of virtue. And a good example of this is the prodigal son and the older brother. As you can see here, this is the prodigal son and the older brother. You have on God's right is the older brother, which is, he's demanding law and strict adherence to the way things should be, which is good. But it can also lead to pride and to being outside the kingdom by your own strict, trying to keep everything so strict and orderly and to the law. And then on to God's left there is the prodigal son who had been chaotic and all of that, but now he's seeking mercy. And this I stole from Jonathan Pageau. Has a lot of good things on the left and the right. On imagery, he's really good. But he from Maximus the Confessor, which I guess he says Maximos Confessor. He's French, and he translated this from Greek into French, I think, where it says, "Demons that combat us by the lack of virtue are those that teach us prostitution and drunkenness, greed, and jealousy." So that's on your left, and then demons that combat us by the excess of virtue, which sounds weird, too much virtue, but that's sort of the order side, are those that teach us presumption, vainglory, and pride, and who, by the vices of the right, secretly place in us the vices of the left. So that's kind of when you want to stand strong. When I was talking about don't being tossed to the left and the right, there's this pendulum that'll toss you away. Like me, I was, revolutionary Antifa type, and then go all the way to super trad, whatever. And really, there's a place of balance in truth and love, of place where you can stand, where you're showing mercy to others, but you also stand firm in what's true. One interesting element to that is also the political elements. You have the left and right. That was from the French Revolution, actually. That wasn't from this earlier imagery, but it kind of maps onto it, because those who sat to the right of the assembly in France started to be called right wing, and they were the people that were loyal to the king and the church and business. And those who sat to the left of the French assembly were those who wanted revolution and get rid of the king and get rid of the church. And so it was more order and chaos. And so now we still kind of keep those people who are more to the right. They want the big, they want order, basically. And then those on the left, they're a little more accepting. And progressive ideas. The left wing are those who want to equalize everything. So I find that kind of interesting, that the left and right earlier imagery actually later mapped onto our left and right of the French assembly thing that we now use as our left and right wing in society. And it's so a lot of what I'm saying about left and right in a moral sense, in a symbolic sense, you can almost apply it to our political world as well. Any lessons you want to take there? But the reason I brought this is Christ Pantocrator, which one of the earliest icons. And you see on the right, he has a book of law and a more serious face. And on the left, he has a hand of mercy and a more gentle face. People have split it apart so you can see it even better. They did like a mirror image. Take the left and double it, and take the right and double it. And you can really see it's almost two different people, but they're trying to show kind of the two elements of God, and these two, the right and left hand of God, that we have to account for, which is the law and sternness. It'll always be there. Reality is going to hit you back hard if you try to pretend like there's no law in the world and there's no natural law, there's no, best practices of how life works. You're going to get smacked, and, God will hold you accountable for things. But on the left, there's also mercy. Jesus was all about showing mercy to the prostitutes and the drunkards and to any of us who ask for it. So that's also key to it. I mean, love is the most important element. When Jesus is asked, what is the most weighty part of the law? It's just love. It's loving God, loving your neighbor as yourself, loving your enemies. That's the law of the new covenant, is love, truth and charity, and faith working itself out in charity. That's another thing Paul says. And also Paul in 1 Corinthians 13, he talks about, it's that some people think it's corny because it's the wedding verse that everybody quotes. But he says that, if you speak in tongues, you don't have love, you're a resounding gong. If you have gift of prophecy and you do all these other things and you can move mountains, but you don't have love, you're nothing. If you possess everything, you give all your possessions to the poor and you give over your body to hardship, that you may boast, but you don't have love, you gain nothing. That's the that I may boast part is important, because a lot of the willing the good of the other is doing that, and it's almost measured by, I was helping the poor. So you don't want to discount that, because that is charity. But if you even do charity for a prideful reason, you gain nothing. So I think that shows, it's love is pretty much the entire game. We want to root ourselves in that place of truth and love, and not be swayed back and forth by these different, maybe truth without love of the right, or love without truth of the left. Just find that place in the center where you're not going to be tossed around by the culture. And, we need the truth of the right and the very sometimes harsh truths of the right, but we also need the instincts of the left to accept people that are a little weird, or to help those who are down and out. Both of those elements. I'm not talking political right and left there. I'm talking about Christ, when he shows law or shows mercy. Both of those are very necessary for us. So that's kind of my story and place I've come to. And my advice to young men is don't get pushed around. Like don't let the world control your emotions or push you into places where you're relying on drugs or relying on, looking at porn or streaming, video or looking at video or playing video games all day or doing things that are just, wasting your time. But also if you get tired of that chaos and all the cultural, chaos of not having an identity and all that, don't sway all the way back over to, some kind of thing where you're trying to apply harsh order on the world either and trying to, beat down people who don't quite fit because maybe a lot of us don't quite fit at times, and we can be brought to truth through love much better than through harshness. So I hope that maybe would mean something to somebody out there. I know most of my comments are people who don't appreciate that I critique traditionalist Catholicism or Groypers or anything like that. I do have a lot of critique for the other side too. I'm by no means a progressive. I'm still right of center, but I do feel like it's a time where I want to critique my own wing of things and people who might also consider themselves conservative or consider themselves Catholic too, because there is a place of balance, and I think a lot of people when they swing back out of rad trad or groyper, they go right past the place of balance and go back to something else kind of extreme, and they keep the pendulum going. So please work to try to find, if you can, a place of truth, and a place where you can express that truth through love. And I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks.